Hi everyone, it's Michelle from Those Who Travel Meet Themselves, and today we are recapping a conversation that we had with Dr. Thembelihle Dube. Dr. Thembelihle Dube is a psychologist. She has been a very good friend of mine for the longest time and has gone through the most with me. And I absolutely love the wisdom and space she has brought into my life, because I can come to Dr. T no matter which way I am, and she has love, space, and light to welcome me and calm me down. I'm normally on the go. So often, she's like, like an ocean, but super calm without the waves. So definitely not the Durban Ocean. In fact, most probably like the Kenyan Ocean, because that is way calm ocean in comparison to some of the oceans we have in South Africa. And so today, it's part of our self-care segment. And what we discussed was grief, and what grief in the time of COVID, in the time of immense loss that we are currently facing, where it's you turn on Facebook, you turn on any social media, and you find yourself either reading about a friend or someone close whom you know who's lost their life to COVID, and also just dealing with that and what it means, because there's so many ways in which our lives have changed in the space of, it hasn't, I think round about this year, COVID was essentially breaking in the news in South Africa. So we haven't necessarily reached the point where we had our first lockdown, which was in end of March, but it was still like a bad thing happening somewhere else. And so almost a year later, we not only have our lives changed in different ways, some for the better, some it's been a jarring experience. And so there are many components of grief that we are facing in our lives, from the family losses that we've had to our own losses in terms of whatever it might be. It might be hugs for a person who likes giving hugs. It might be, a person who enjoys being in other people's company. It's the social aspects. It just has such a wide scope that, we really have to ask ourselves, where to from here? How do we keep our sanity? And how do we grieve during this loss, where we don't know how it's, when it's going to end, how it's going to continue, and essentially the strife that it has come with it. Because also the flip side to it is that, there's you just don't know. So I'm gonna hand over to Dr. Dube just to introduce yourself further, Dr. Dube. I always call her Dr. T because I'm like, T, hey T. So, but she's Dr. Dube. She's Dr. Thembelihle Dube. And what a beautiful name at that. Thembelihle. You are really beautiful faith indeed.
Michelle, again, thank you so much for always affording me the opportunity to have this conversation with you and your community. I really, really appreciate that you give me the space, right? You always create room for me to be able to share, but also just allowing me to just be here with you. Um, it's a really it's a privilege, and I'm really grateful that we can continue to be here in this way together. I think it's a privilege that we need to acknowledge that not many of us are still around. Many of us have lost loved ones, have lost friends. It's been a very, very scary time, Michelle. Um, very scary time. I think what really has been scary is just, when COVID initially arrived in our shores, I remember how many people, there wasn't a, I mean, we didn't take it, a lot of people didn't take it seriously. The lockdown was quite jarring. But there was also something containing with the lockdown because we almost as though government is taking control and things are being put into place. But then as we moved down from level 5 to the lower levels, a lot of frustration started setting in because a lot of people, I mean, the impact still seemed very distal for many people. But now, not very few people have been left unaffected. Um, I'm a clinical psychologist in private practice, and of late, there is not a single person I've interacted with that has been left untouched by COVID, be it a close loved one, be it extended family member, relative, or even friends. So you're finding it's it's been quite jarring, like you said, for all of us. And I think the reason why it has had this kind of an effect, it's just kind of the scope and the number of people who have been impacted, but also and the speed, but also the manner in which things are having to unfold, right? So we find that our morning rituals and the way in which we go about laying our loved ones to rest, there's always those rituals almost contain the person who has lost a loved one, and the family. You've got these protracted rituals, morning rituals that often occur. But with COVID-19 and the way in which this virus spreads has forced us to curtail those familiar ways of mourning. And in that way, the support that would normally, and the support and the kind of containment that the family would have isn't there. You're finding that a funeral has to literally commences at 7:30 and is concluded at 9:30. And by the end of the day, everything has been wrapped up, which is unheard of, right? Because you would have preceding days of imilindelo and wakes in comforting the family members, and you'd have people coming in to actually support and be with the family member for an extended period of time. The family members would sit on a mattress in order to be received, in order to be comforted by the community. All of that has had to go because for fear of possible transmission of the virus. Similarly, there have been instances where family members can't even go and see their loved one that has passed away. They can't even view the body of the loved one. And so even those that process of letting go, of seeing your loved one, indeed, that is my father, my brother, my uncle, my sister, my cousin, my friend, who is indeed is passing on, moving from one realm to the other. Often they're not able to do that, right? And even just the manner where the way in which it's occurring, they're having to be quickly put into a box and into the ground, right? In some instances, you're finding that because of what is happening, people are even having to consider cremation in some instances often in many instances something that is unusual, right? But even for those faiths and communities who do cremate their loved ones, finding themselves that there is such, the crematoria are full.
Yeah.
So you're finding that the ways in which we used to do things have been really kind of usurped. They're not accessible to us, and the ways of gaining comfort and support are not there. And
Yes.
that's one of the challenging aspects about this virus. So when we were speaking about grief, not only are we grieving the loved ones, but also grieving the loss of that which is familiar, loss of the ways in which we used to kind of do things, loss of the containing and grounding rituals. But also,
Yeah.
Michelle, the loss of what we used to know, the normality as we know it. And a
Yeah.
lot of us, we have to kind of allow ourselves the space to mourn and grieve the fact that things have changed drastically.
Yeah.
And in terms of, and when we look at how does this grief process unfold, what are some of the things that, the community can look out for? I think
Yeah.
it's important, one of the things to note, that every person's process of grief is different. No
Yeah.
two,
It's not the same. It's definitely not the same. Yeah.
no
And
two.
I often feel like, even as well, when you're grieving, it's different from each loss that you have, you know. So even that differs in different ways. And so, it can be a colleague, it can be a family member, different things. You've created memories with this human being, and different things come up at different times. And so your grief will never be the same for each person. And you don't have a manual of, okay, so it starts from the day this person passes. Not necessarily either.
And
Sometimes it hits you 2 weeks later because you're just not processing it.
no two people's grief is going to be the same. And irrespective of the nature of the relationship, irrespective of who it is. And often people expect themselves to kind of, experience grief in particular ways. And also, what we've found, I mean, just as an example, last year, I remember Kobe Bryant. I mean, there were a number of key losses that happened last year. Kobe Bryant passed away early last year. And I remember just how it was, I remember the feeling of loss, and the grief I experienced. And a number of people experienced the same grief, and there was almost a sense of, am I allowed to feel grief? This is not a person I knew personally, but can I feel this grief? But we we felt it, right? Because
Absolutely. I
we
totally
had
agree
a
with you.
relationship there was a relationship that we had with this individual, in as much as um, we may not have interacted personally with this particular individual. And
Mm-hmm.
similarly, the losses that we saw with Breonna Taylor, and the way the impact that they have on us. But and these things we experience them, right? They may seem far out there, but we experience them, and we experience grief.
Absolutely.
And it's
Yeah.
grief that you need to acknowledge. But when you as an individual are experiencing grief, you will find that there's certain, you know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was working with terminally ill clients, and she kind of has a map of some of the observations that she had around individuals that were terminally ill. And we use Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's kind of observations, and they
Yeah.
become stages of grief. But
Yeah.
it's important to note that they're not necessarily stages per se, more than more than kind of
Different
aspects,
levels, like different stations, maybe.
experience, or states that a person can actually experience. but one can move in and out of in a cyclical way. So it's not a kind of a linear, progressive approach, but it's
Yes,
a
where I've
more of a
passed that
cyclical.
stage, so I'm not going back
Yes.
kind of situation.
Indeed. And so these states that she talks about are denial, and denial comes in the form, Michelle, where you find that you lose a loved one, but you carry on as though everybody around you almost says, this person is carrying on as though nothing has happened. But often it's not so much that that
Yes.
person is carrying on as if nothing has happened. The person may not be ready to fully delve into those emotions, and often that response is what the individual can cope with at that particular point in time. And often people will feel like, no, we need to kind of shake him or her out into, they need to kind of feel and experience the pain. But it's never for anyone outside of the person's experience to tell the person what they need to do, because when the person is able to, they will then kind of move beyond that phase. So there may be this shock and often denial of what has happened. Then there could be anger, right?
Yeah.
Anger could manifest in the sense that anger and guilt, anger at possibly people who may have a person who feels that they were someone was infected by a particular person, and then there'd be anger
Yeah.
at the individual that may have infected them. But also the anger can also be very diffuse, right? Just a generalized anger towards the person that may have infected one, towards God, and maybe even towards self, for ideas around what I should have done, shouldn't have done, or people around you, they should have done more. And then guilt as well, right? Is it
Yeah.
anger, guilt, the guilt of I should have, I didn't, I should have
Yeah.
done more, I could have done more. And so one is racked by these feelings of guilt and anger. And these feelings can be quite overwhelming, especially the anger, right? And you know, when a person is experiencing loss, you can see this quality where they are very intense because of either this guilt or anger.
Yeah.
Then it could be, at some instances, there could be, bargaining, right? Thinking, no, 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 maybe if I do, especially if a person is maybe sick, or you can see this person is in the process of dying, you're hoping, you start bargaining with God. Maybe if I do this, God will not take
Yes,
this
if I
person
behave myself, maybe you will not take them. I promise I will go to church going forward. I will be, yeah, that is, there's a lot of bargaining that takes place. And I think because I saw a post on Facebook where someone said, let us not forget that at some point we're going to have family members pointing fingers at each other, saying you infected, a family member, you brought it home. And I think it's a difficult thing because I don't think anyone willingly wants to hurt anyone, whether they're best friends with that family member, or just okay with each other. I don't think anybody comes with that intention. So it's such a difficult thing that and we know, because these are the things that break up families and cause a rift in families, where someone will easily blame someone for something else, knowing very well the extent of heaviness that blame can bring to that person. And so almost as if wielding an axe on purpose, in order to kind of, you know, I, whenever someone does it, I feel like people do things in order to actually hurt someone, so that, and it can be an everlasting hurt. They don't mind. Some people are quite malicious in that sense, where you whip out something with the intention to hurt with strategic laser definition, you know,
And
and
and I think the thing is, Michelle, it often that comes from that place of anger, right? Where you because and it's just this grief process that overtakes one, and then it then leads to those processes where if a person were to be able to take a step, if a person were to appreciate that I am angry and this anger is as a result of my grief, just that knowledge allows you it allows you to kind of just you know take a step back and take a step back and proceed in a different way rather than not knowing.
yeah,
And that also then kind of the other kind of states that one can find themselves in is that state of kind of sadness, or in the literature it's called depression. But this isn't clinical depression per se. This is more sadness, kind of the low mood, the just the generalized sadness,
yeah, yeah.
that comes
The
from
the one that kind of stays with you, that even when you see them and they say I'm well, you look at them and you can see that sadness that sits very neatly next to the I'm well.
and this is the sadness that as a person you one would need to learn to coexist with, right? Because when you lose a loved one, right, it's almost as though people always say that it feels like there is a gap or there is a hole that cannot be filled, right? And it's true. It's true. There is a hole, and it cannot be filled.
Yeah,
And that hole will ever bring with it sadness. And
mm,
so the intensity of the sadness in time will diminish. But
mm,
the idea that there will be a time when there is no sadness, unfortunately, that isn't to be.
mm,
Over time, the intensity of the sadness will diminish. But one has to begin to live with that hole, that
yeah,
emptiness that the
yeah,
person's departure leaves in your life. And so it's just this,
absolutely.
it's this sadness that's just will live with you. And over time, and I guess the next state then becomes the sense of acceptance. The intensity is not as it's not as much.
Yeah,
In acceptance, there is you come to the realization that this person is gone, and you begin to live your life with that acknowledgement, right?
yeah,
Also, it's the acknowledge. I mean, part of acceptance is the acknowledgement of the feelings, the sadness that, and all these
yeah.
feelings will come up on
Yeah, and
account.
they come up at different times as well. It's not always immediate. It has sometimes just the smallest thing will bring, have you welling up in tears. Sometimes you'll be driving, listening to a very happy song, even singing along, and all of a sudden tears are pouring down your face. You
and
know?
and that's because of the grief. It will come. It will come. It's cyclical. These states will come in different times, and anniversaries, the birthdays, special songs, special moments, scents, dresses, so many things that will remind you of your loved one will evoke the feelings of grief.
Yeah,
And most important thing is for you to accept that
yeah,
without trying to suppress, ignore, and avoid. Because it's the suppressing, ignoring, and avoiding that causes problems. Because
mm,
those are that's when things get worse, and often those are the instances where all the pain then almost becomes septic, and one finds themselves dealing with a more clinical situation where one finds themselves with a chronic case of bereavement that can, lead into a major depressive disorder. But if one allows themselves to feel, acknowledges the pain, and also make the people around you aware that I have experienced this loss, so that when they see you crying, there's an understanding of what is happening and why. But if you are going to hide it, people are not going to know why you are sad, crying, possibly angry. They won't understand. Whereas if you convey to them that I've had this loss, people are able to be mindful of that. But you have to be brave enough to convey that to everybody.
Yeah. And I think that's difficult because sometimes we feel that, sometimes people don't know how to deal with someone who's grieving, people will be like, oh, but 2 months has gone by already, you know. Yeah. And you're like, I go, John, because what is 2 months? Um, time stops sometimes. It literally feels like time slows down, and it can feel like it's going slowly and fast at the same time.
And who's to say how long one's, like we said initially, it can be 2 months, it can be a year. When you're grieving the loss of your mother or father, you're grieving the loss of your child, there is what is the time frame, what reference do you have as to how long a person should grieve for? So I think when it comes to how people can support an individual that is grieving, and especially during the time of COVID, it's really about being present and listening, not offering advice, not trying to fix and make better, because you can't fix and make it better. And presence in this instance, where you can't be physically present, it's about maybe perhaps picking up the phone and just listening and saying, friend, how are you? Brother, how are you? How are you feeling? And listening. And it could look like talking about whatever the individual feels like talking about. That is enough. And if the conversation veers towards the loss, great. If it does not, it need not.
It's also fine, yeah.
And in the early phases, the question is what else can I do? It's about taking groceries or bringing a dish. You know what they need this time. Go and bring them a dish
for someone, because you really feel like cooking for yourself after a loss, and you still have to eat. You still have to eat. You still need to keep your energy up. So really, like, I think a meal goes a long way, because food always tastes better when someone else has cooked it for you. Like I always think that is the one thing about helping people grieve, is just being there and just giving them the space, as you say, T, to just have that holding space. Someone who says, I'm here, I'm not here to say anything else, but I'm here. In what way can I be of service to you?
And that's it, Michelle. And that's all that individual requires. And even saying something like, I actually don't know what you need, or I don't know what to do, I don't know how to be there with you. That honesty with people can be so containing. You don't have to know, right? They don't expect to know either. But also, Michelle, I think for the person, I mean, David Kessler, who wrote in an amazing article on grief, especially as the COVID-19 kind of began, and he was, when there was everybody was just in this, we were all stunned. He wrote this piece on how we are all, what we're feeling is grief. He worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and he wrote a book on the sixth stage, or the sixth state, which is meaning. And he highlights how over time one will be able to look back and see how the loss, the kind of how one can make meaning from the loss that has occurred. But that really often happens over a long period of time. But that can be possible for
Yeah.
some people. So, as one who has lost a loved one, in terms of just coping, it's really important to be kind with yourself. I think more
Yes.
than anything else during this time, if I can ask one thing of all of us, is to be kind with ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
And kindness in this instance would mean acknowledge your pain rather than suppressing, avoiding, and ignoring it. When the pain strikes and you don't feel like talking to anybody, write about it. Get a journal,
Yeah.
color in, paint if you paint, draw. Some people have musical talents. Whichever way that you can express it constructively, do that. Um,
Yeah.
lean into your family. You
Mm-hmm.
know, grieving and mourning cannot occur. You can't do it on your own. Lean
Absolutely.
into your family, lean into your loved ones, because that way you can be nourished and contained. Make sure that you surround yourself with nourishing influences. You're not going to enlist people that are not helpful, that are just, that are not going to be nourishing. Make
Yes.
sure the influences that you have, I mean, especially during this time, I'm saying to everybody, that curate your experiences. Make sure that you're reading nourishing material, you're listening to nourishing podcasts, you're watching nourishing
Yeah.
material, you're listening to nourishing music, you're eating nourishing food. The
Yeah.
food, when your spirit is low, make sure that the food you're eating is nourishing, and make
Yes.
sure that you're nourishing your body. Right? Exercise. If exercise, if rigorous exercise is too much, go for a walk,
Yeah.
try restorative yoga, right?
Mm-hmm.
But make sure that you're moving your body, because your mind, remember, resides in a body. And if the
Yes.
body is not healthy, how can the mind be healthy? So nourish your body, make sure, be mindful of that which you're taking in. Ask yourself the question, is this nourishing? Take in
Yeah.
nourishing food. And also just really, really, if you are one who believes in a deity and in prayer, turn towards prayer. And meditation is also an incredibly grounding way for yourself during this particular time. And if still you're finding that you are struggling to lean into your family or your network, and you want some, you feel that you still need to kind of express yourself and be heard, you can choose to enlist a clinician who will
Mm.
support you and give you the space to actually really express and go to those really, really difficult places that you need to. But one thing for sure,
Yeah.
lean into your loved ones. Don't try and do this on your own.
Yeah.
And
No, definitely
focus
not.
on kindness.
Yeah. Because I think the point about, whatever you put in has to be nourishing. I mean, I've been so careful about what I watch and what I allow. Back in the day, I remember I once went to go watch a horror film, and just the sounds alone were just too much for me. And I decided that's it. My soul doesn't need horror films. I'm not made for the horror stuff. I don't like it. it vexes my soul instead of throw popcorn into your mouth and just enjoy whatever is taking place. So and in knowing that, I've stayed away from it moving forward in my life from that time. And so again, it becomes like, what am I consuming on social media? What am I sharing with other people? What are the things that I'm finding funny? Like, is it really funny, or is it humor at the expense of another person? And so, and it's it's definitely a time where, because you are constantly on what you call this, devices to keep in contact with other people, you find that it's easy to consume stuff that you weren't even planning to be consuming, because it popped up on the screen. And so I think it's definitely something that we need to think of very critically, and also just know when to shut down and not participate, because there also comes a time where we have to actually take a step back and go into nature. I really felt the other day that I just needed to just walk in somewhere, and all parks were closed. And I was like, what? Where they actually close parks where people just walk, like where people aren't coming to picnic. And so it was, and when I say I wanted to be in nature, I mean I wanted to be in a place where there weren't people, but I could just be at peace with nature, because I just needed to close out the frequency.
Mm. And hiking is great for that. Finding hiking spots, but also gardening. Right, I've found a lot of. I've heard a lot of individuals who've spoken about how gardening grounds them. The
Yes.
process of being outdoors, kind of being with the plants, watching them grow, nourishing them. There's something
Mm-hmm.
about the gardening process that, and often they, before they do anything else, they start in their garden, water their plants, and they feel so grounded. And when they're out in their gardens, they feel so nourished. So things of that nature. But so making sure that, like you're saying, Michelle, you are kind of you're nourishing yourself in nature, because it can be really, really rejuvenating. But
Yes.
that does not take away leaning into your loved ones, right? So making sure that every now and again you are connecting and talking to loved ones, or if not talking to loved ones, talking to a clinician, or writing down and expressing how you're feeling. Very, very,
Mm-hmm.
very, very important. But this time, Michelle, it's a challenging time for all of us.
Yeah. Yes.
And
Yes.
it's important for us to be mindful that it's not an easy time. And as we interact with each other, to do so gently and with kindness.
Yeah. And with respect. And with respect, because whatever we do, a person who, I'll never forget a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, passed on, right? And he had gone, so basically he'd gone missing, and he had gone for a jog, and he'd had a heart attack on the side of the road, and so for 5 days no one found him. And the interesting thing was that, so everybody was looking for him, because it was unlike him to just disappear like that. But someone then heard and sent me an SMS and said, "Oh, they found him, and he's dead." And I just thought, you know, I've always known death to be something that is dealt with um, with respect and with gentle hands, and not something that you just flippantly throw out, because you know you want the person to be in a state to receive the news. I could have been, it so happened that I happened to be at home, but I could have been driving. I could have been, what you call this? I could have been out at dinner with someone. You know, for me, I was upset for the longest time with this person for having sent me this message, knowing very well how close a relationship I had with this person. And so I think we really, like you were saying earlier on, that we have to approach these things with kindness, because we don't know where people are, we don't know what they are doing. And at the end of the day, this is their parent, this is their husband, this is their friend, this is their lover, this is whoever this person is in their life. And sometimes when we want to just carry the news, instead of actually just taking a step back and saying, if I tell this person this, am I the right person to be sharing the news with them? So I do wish we would respect it more and allow the family to deal with it, and set the tone of how they would like to proceed with people engaging. And I've seen a lot of people asking for privacy. Larry King passed on, and his family asked for privacy. And because it's become so we want everything to belong to us, that we no longer respect a person's transition. We make it about ourselves. And so I do hope that we move in the decisions that we make are with kindness, and that this message of kindness that you're sharing with us is something that we really take with us, not only in dealing with ourselves, but in dealing with those who have lost someone, who have lost something in their lives.
Michelle, thank you so much for this time. And I really, really wish that the community finds value in our conversation. And please, everybody, keep safe. Make sure that you are wearing your mask properly when you're out there. Make sure that you're sanitizing, observing social distance,
Washing your hands,
washing your hands,
covering your nose, cover your nose when wearing your mask, please.
and
And
just
with absolute respect, but please, it needs to, just do what's right.
and be kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. T, Dr. Dube, thank you so much for this time. And for anybody who would like to contact Dr. Dube, I know that you do consults as well via Zoom and the various setups that are currently in place. A person can contact Dr. Thembelihle Dube at www.tim. Is it Dr. Thembelihle Dube or just Thembelihle Dube?
Thembelihle Dube.
ThembelihleDube.com. And you can also purchase your TD journal from Dr. Dube through the website. Visit the website. It's got some great articles as well. So it's got a lot of resources. You would be in good hands right over there. Dr. T, thank you so much for your time yet again. I appreciate it, and I look forward to February, where we have our next session of Self-Care Tuesday with Dr. Thembelihle Dube. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for this time.
Thank you, Michelle. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.